All right, we are live here again with Alison McDowell. Very, very excited to have you back, Alison. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for engaging in the conversations. I'm really grateful.
Yes, same here. We had a lot of feedback, a lot of interest in your last interview. And just like with this one, we can come up with a title, but the reality is that this is covering literally the entire framework of the new reality that I think we've all seen roll in year 2020. And that is also why I feel your work really needs to get out there. And I just, again, thank you so much for what you're doing. So I'll let you introduce the topic since you have this encyclopedic dot connecting gift. And we're going to have hundreds of people on the live stream today. So it's the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Well, I sort of see this talk is building on, the conversation that we had, I don't know, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago? So if folks are maybe having a hard time getting up to speed, I would say just sort of hang in there. If you like, maybe we can link to the other one, when this gets posted so that people can have more background. It's a bit like learning a new language and also sort of revisiting what you understand about the world. And some of this is, if you're not used to questioning how things are, it's unsettling. So I would say, just hang with me. I have about 50 slides today and a number of maps that I've been able to put together to share, to talk about essentially the idea of managing agriculture and our food systems around health and even like gut health, which is really interesting, and the way that is being enmeshed in global finance, but also in ways that will, if we don't question or intervene, which I think many people will if once they understand what this is about, will actually start to fabricate digital twins of us to be managed in a cyber kind of environment. And this isn't going to happen immediately, but I think we need to understand the trends of managing our bodies as data from a health and wellness situation, both the health piece and the computerization piece. So I have some slides. Let me see, I'll do the screen share here. Let's see.
Alison, also, if you could just summarize, I guess, the last talk, because at the end of it, I started to see the vision. You had collapsed it into a few sentences. It was something to the effect of militarized hedge funds driving like social impact markets. Is that, can you just say something about that before you start the presentation?
Sure. So ultimately, this idea is, if we imagine the world being covered in layers of data and information, and that's called augmented reality or mixed reality. It's sensors. Right now, it's something as basic as a phone, but sensors are being embedded into the environment around us and even ultimately into our bodies. And it's almost like they are remaking the world as a game, but it's not a very nice game, and that people are betting on this game and how we operate within the confines of the game. And this augmented mixed reality is fundamentally a military space, even though it may be fun and enjoyable, Pokemon Go or video games, beautiful and creative. The structure is a military structure. And then the entities that will be betting on the outcomes of this game, and it's a game that's happening in a world where increasingly non-mechanical life is not valued, is that these hedge funds will be doing the gambling. And potentially even the smart environments that are regulated with sensors and information may shape the outcomes of our lives in ways we don't even realize, through like artificial intelligence and quantum computing. So I sort of imagine it as there are two realities unfolding, one of which is a recognition of interconnectedness in a larger cosmic, dynamic, energetic system of connection and care and beauty and surprise and unfoldingness. Like there's that piece that we are all inherently connected to as living beings, connected to all the other living beings in the cosmos. But but then they're looking to hijack all of that power into a more narrow and limited electrically engineered system. And that because of crises, because of austerity, people are being forced into making choices that they don't understand the larger consequences of, especially what's unfolding now in this sort of, global lockdown moment, that people are not fully aware of what is transpiring on the greater stage. So I still feel confident that with the right information and people coming from a place of, power and love and heartfulness, like that, this will not unfold the way they think it's going to unfold. But as someone who both in my local community has seen these dynamics at work and then tracking it in the digital space, I feel it's my responsibility to share that. And again, I'm very grateful for others who provide space to share that with other people, because I think knowledge is power. Knowledge doesn't mean that these things are absolute or definitely going to happen, but we would be remiss, I think, in not understanding the mindset of the individuals involved. So
beautiful. That helps tremendously, Alison. The reason why I feel so compelled by your work and why we're having this conversation so soon after the last is because you're one of the few people that can hold this vision, which is very dark, and still communicate a positive message, which is that it's not inevitable, that there's still things we can do, but you're also willing to completely strip back the veil and fearlessly confront what we're up against. And I thank you for that, and those who are here now, as it takes courage to do that.
Well, I feel like in stepping out on this, I've really benefited. I'm sharing information that's been shared with me by many other individuals. So I, in no respect, want to take credit for all of the stuff that's here. I think we're building a community of knowledge, which is really vital. And so I come at things from that framework. And I also want to say some of the things I'm talking about, what compelled me to want to sort of expose and talk about the agriculture and the soil and the health systems at this moment is that in my non-research time, I actually work at a public garden in our city. And I'm mostly like the computer person, like typing in and doing data entry, which is really dumb. But I've been exposed to people who have a tremendous respect for land as a point of healing, especially historic trauma, and whose work I really, really respect as very authentic work around care for land and relationships in community across human life, ecosystem life, the complexity and beauty of that, and someone who has a really strong spiritual grounding. So if some of what I developed was in response to a particular situation that unfolded where I think what was being conveyed was not that. And so I'm coming at a place not of interrogation of that particular individual, but of the structure of the system, because I feel really strongly in the respect of my colleagues who are doing this work that is the work that should be done, and that we need to be very clear about language that is co-opted and used to advance things that knowingly or unknowingly are not going to be the right direction. So anyway, so I will pop up my screen here. Let's see, does that, let's see. Can you see the screen here?
I can't see your screen, but I can add this to the stream. So I wonder if there you go. Okay. I think it's up there now.
Okay, let me see. Let me stop it and start it again, just so I have control of it, because I want to be able to click through. Okay, can you see it now?
Yeah, let me add to stream.
Oh,
yes.
Okay.
Is that working okay or not?
It is. I guess I'm just thinking, is it advancing for you?
It is, yes.
Okay, all right, great. Okay. All right, so just to sort of touch base, initially, when I broached this conversation, we said, well, maybe I'd really like to respond and have a conversation around health impact bonds in agriculture. And then in doing that, and some of the things that have come into the news in the past week or so since we connected on that, the scope expanded a bit more. So I just want to touch base initially on this slide to say that, this talk is going to be a bit about how COVID and the climate crisis are being used as a justification to reset the global food system. and that hunger and nutrition and like precision medicine will become markets for these global investments. That the use of genetic modification and things including digital vaccines, which are like online games, are going to be used to modify both humans physically and both physical and behaviorally. And that the gamification of proper health behavior will be used to create profit streams for sort of global corporations, and then also lead to the collection of data that will advance us as sort of digital twins. Now, I'm wading into this space. My expertise is far more around how the finance interfaces with control of populations, especially impoverished populations. And I'm stepping into spaces that are probably much more thoroughly surfaced by some other people. So I just want to acknowledge like Alana Freeland, Sarah, I know that you had a talk with her previously, and she has a book coming out on transhumanism. So in that space, if you're interested in learning more, I definitely recommend her. I have a friend who does a lot of blogging around nanotechnology and biotechnology, and she is one of the authors on A Piece of Mindful. And clearly, like Ice Age Farmer has been doing a lot in food systems. So I don't want to overstep and articulate, like present myself as an expert in this, but in this moment, I think the finance piece is what I can add. So I just want to make it clear. So just to start off, I wrote a blog post about 3 weeks ago after an interview that I saw online about an individual who was starting a social impact fund. And it was around regenerative agriculture. And, you know, my radar went up a bit because I know that impact investing, the whole concept of impact, leans on data, massive data analytics. And the data analytics rely on devices. And those devices have environmental consequences and consequences of surveillance. And so while much of the language around impact investing is very attractive, the reality, once you peel below the surface, is often not necessarily what you might imagine going forward. And this individual was talking about scaling, which to me is always sort of a bit of a red flag, because scaling means that it's something that's not individualized to community, that's not necessarily community driven, and using finance with Bank of America. And Bank of America was one of the entities that was like played a very significant role in the last global economic crash. So, you know, there were a number of things that I was looking at. They were talking about modeling an urban farm, which is this allegory of farms. And they talked about it being in grown on tabletops in the parking lots of food pantries. And so my concern over that was, you know, twofold. One, having these impact, having the impact, being in the impact arena, partnering with entities that actually have profited from poverty and displacement of people from their homes. And two, like, what is the nature of regenerative agriculture? Is this, you know, is that table full of kale? Is that it? Because in some respects, that more or less connects more with like the Agenda 21 high density urban manufactured farming, as opposed to me, that doesn't look like an ecosystem. It looks like more of a new variation on factory farming. This interview also touched on diabetes as one of the issues that would be addressed by this new form of agriculture, and that impacted communities would benefit from fresh food, which is certainly true, but that the diabetes was an element in that. And I know that diabetes is one of the key, diabetes and obesity, along with heart disease and asthma, are among the chronic illnesses that are being advanced for pay for success impact investing and the social determinants of health. And I felt very strongly, because this particular impact fund was also, it was one fund among several that was tied to a venture capital firm, a social impact venture capital firm that had a very close relationship with Jefferson Health. One of the offices of this umbrella organization that was holding this particular fund has offices in my city. It has several offices. There's one in my city of Philadelphia, where I'm based. And Jefferson Health is a health system that is very innovative. But if you go to their ER, and this is downtown Philadelphia, the doctor will be on a screen. So that is the telehealth, telemedicine model. And they had partnered with the Parks and Recreation Department to do a playground renovation. This is Waterloo Playground in West Kensington. It's the like really the center of the heroin epidemic in the city. And they were redesigning this playground using a data-driven model in which they were putting Fitbit trackers on children and using drone surveillance to monitor use of the playground, which to me is very problematic. And that was one of the reasons that I felt like I needed to speak out, because if people are not aware that these things are going on, you could proceed pretty far down the road and not realize it. So the diabetes is a cost offset, and I spoke at it in some detail in my previous presentation called Pay for Success Finance. The idea that investors will invest in a solution and their return on investment will be paid out of reducing the problem, reducing the cost of the problem. In this case, chronic illness and keeping someone who is pre-diabetic from becoming diabetic. Jim Heckman had set up an equation. He's a Nobel Prize winning economist at the University of Chicago, and he's funded by Open Society and the Pritzker family. And he had an equation for early childhood education funding that would offer a 7 to 10% rate of return for investments, impact investments in pre-K and home visits and some of these other types of investments. But they could get the return on investment, you see the arrow here, up to 13% if they included health data. And so that health data is going to be linked to chronic illness, things like asthma and diabetes. And that's why we're seeing things like smart playgrounds, and data collection of children on playgrounds is to justify these impact markets. So diabetes is a key part of this. The health sector is United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 3. Health is 3 and hunger is 2. So the other issue when we're talking about this new system of resilient farming, particularly feeding the poor, is around hunger. And I felt very strongly in speaking to this because several years ago, when I was doing my research around Pay for Success Finance, I watched a video of a winter conference on social impact innovation, and it was in Utah. And one of the featured people was Ian Galloway, and he's there just to the one side of the plant, and he's with the San Francisco Federal Reserve. And they were talking essentially, this wasn't a panel on hunger per se, but at the end of the panel in the Q&A, there was a woman who raised her hand and she said, I'm with the food pantry here in Salt Lake City, and I'm trying to figure out why Pay for Success never works for feeding people, because if people are hungry, really you can try to fix their other problems, but if they're hungry, that's never really going to be very successful. Like hunger is a really basic need. And so I'm just going to read this section. This is a transcript, and I just found out today when I reposted it, this video is 2 years old, that the video has now disappeared. So I'm really glad that I transcribed this Q&A, but this is a section of it. And this, I think, speaks to this idea of using Pay for Success, linking it to wellness and hunger mitigation. So this is Ian Galloway. I'm so glad you asked that question because it's such a great example of what I consider to be these sort of nested outcomes. And there's a lot, always, a lot of these determinants of success. And some of these more narrow determinants are difficult to fund with a performance-based contract or an outcomes-based funding stream. Okay, so they're saying it's hard to fund hunger. There are a lot of reasons for that, and part of it has to do with that it's difficult to find savings in the system. I know I just went on a diatribe about how we shouldn't use that as a basis for establishing value, but the truth is a lot of people do. And improving nutrition, well, it's hard to follow the money. And if you can't follow the money to an agency that saves when you increase nutrition, then it's difficult to reroute that money and pay for projects that address the underlying needs. So that's one of the big reasons we don't do this. The larger challenge is that it's one of many component pieces to a larger anti-poverty strategy that tends not to get included as much as I think we all wish it were. So in this discussion, essentially the Federal Reserve is saying that we cannot feed these children because we can't find the cost offset. And later in the conversation, he posits that perhaps the cost offset could be test score improvements. That we would feed people, we would feed children if they improved their test scores. And that's pretty heavy, right? I mean, that's why I have to speak out about this, because that's the reality of how this very twisted thinking operates when we make human needs a global investment commodity. And so I opened this particular blog post when I wrote it, and I said, I used this quote from Dom Helder Camara, who was a liberation theologist from Brazil. And he said, "When I give food to the poor, they call me a saint. And when I ask why the poor have no food, they call me a communist." And so I think that's sort of where we are in this moment, especially with the lockdowns, with poverty, with looking at a reset food system, with understanding climate change, is that we're looking at powerful, powerful individuals remaking life on the planet, including the lives of children and the poor, into vehicles for their benefit. And food is at the core, our most basic need: food and water and shelter. Food, water, and shelter. Those are the basics. And when you control that, you control a lot. So in exploring this a little bit today, because a lot of this is going into chemical companies and genetically modified organisms, someone shared with me a paper about bees. And I have a bit of a soft spot in my heart for bees, because one of my colleagues, they're a very big fan of bees, not particularly honeybees, but the native bees and the native pollinators. And when you walk in the garden in the height of summer, and we just had a new garden that's only about 3 years old, and it's in the full sun, and it has these abundant flowers. My colleagues keep it so amazingly. And you walk in the height of the sunny day, and the numbers of pollinators flying are just astonishing, from the teeny tiniest ones to ones that look like moths, practically, like hummingbird moths, huge. And I love them. And so when we're standing up against what is unfolding, we're standing up not just for children, but we're also standing up for all of the other beings, including the bees. And I think if we look and see how they treat the bees, we might realize what the stakes are, because we'll be the next bees, because they're building a world for these guys, for Boston Dynamics, which is recently owned by SoftBank out of Japan. And we'll talk about SoftBank in Japan and twinning a little bit later. But they want to build a world for these folks and not for us and the bees.
I just want to share something, Alison. Is incidentally right here in the back, we have a wild bee hive colony. And yeah, we moved in recently, and we have a garden going now too, which is amazing. But a friend of mine was pointing out they were coming around and swarming and looking at us. And, he said that they actually have facial recognition systems, and that, of course, you don't respond aggressively, and then they kind of go away. And I thought that was such a great comparison with like the wild AI, of a divine intelligence versus what we're up against. So just sharing.
Yeah. I mean, they're amazing. And we just need to be more humble about learning from the natural world instead of looking at as a product. So this is like something I found. This is from the, it's the UN, the Food and Agriculture Association of the United Nations. This is from 2006. And they're talking about the pollinators as the economic valuation of pollination services, and that's such a direct contrast to, I think this is a bee in the tree peony, in front of the garden where I was talking about now. And so we don't look at that and say, well, what is the value of that being's pollination services? But that's how these systems think about life, is as pollination services. And the paper that was shared with me on Twitter this morning, we talked about robot bees and these genetically modified bees. And so they're saying that the first a genetically engineered bee that they did in 2014, right? So 6 years ago, and they're using CRISPR technologies to genetically engineer bees to survive the hazards of pesticides. Which is, I mean, I guess I'm not shocked, but I think that speaks to the nature of this sort of chemical bioengineered world, the engineered world that we're in, that rather than create a world that isn't imbued with chemical pesticides, we will re-engineer the beings to live in the pesticide covered world. And so I think that's really important to think about. And that also that they were looking at the genetic basis of behavior. And that's going to be really important as we talk later about digital twinning and gamification and genetics, that they're looking at genetics and behavior. And increasingly, I think the goal will be to re-engineer life to fit a world that is that world for like the robot people, you know, the robot entities, those mechanized entities. But just understanding that CRISPR and chemistry and the genetic monitoring of behavior, to me, that just hit me really hard. And then knowing that, you know, the idea of robotic bees, which they've already developed. And I think there were, you know, I talk about Black Mirror being one of those, you know, predictive profiling shows, but there's a whole episode around robotic bees and actually being weaponized against people on Twitter. So in this section, they said that in 2009, they were looking at what it would be like to create a robot bee colony. So Sarah, that speaks to what you were talking about, the swarming behaviors. They're working on methods of making them cooperate like a real hive. So, you know, we understand that these entities that are working on biotech and working on reframing sustainability and cooperation around the poisoning of the planet as a hive mind situation, almost a hive mind game. So if you consider the idea of uploading bee brains to robots and what that might indicate for us down the road, if they're willing to engineer bee brains to an optimal behavior according to what scientists want and upload it into a robot, what does that mean in terms of humanity and a cyborg future if the goal of some of these individuals is like a hive mind consciousness? So I just thought that was really useful background as we get started, because to us, to the billionaire class, we're just bees waiting to be robot bees with an uploaded brain. I mean, I really think so. And as we do to wildlife populations and domestic, like livestock populations, like those are and then refugee populations and the poor, like those are the early phases of what we can anticipate coming to all of life if we don't resist. So before I move into digital vaccines, do you have any, are there any like comments? I'm not seeing, I have to be on my own screen, so I'm not seeing you.
Oh, I can put the comments back. I was going to just point out that the great irony here is that the millimeter waves that they're trying to roll out with 5G systems, for example, are so, you know, toxic to life. You know, they have to cut trees down because they get in the way. They absorb through the water molecule a lot of the spectrum. So it's really kind of sad that this system they need for the Internet of Things and Internet of Bodies is intrinsically toxic to the things that they're replacing. So, but if you want to look at some of the comments here on the right, there's probably a lot. So I don't know if that's going to necessarily.
Okay. Well, I figure I'll pause occasionally because right now I'm just looking at my screen. But I will say too about the 5G, you know, these small cells don't project very far. And so they're even talking about cutting down real trees and putting up like fake trees that will better accommodate the 5G.
Yes.
And you know, I need to get further into the book, but the Invisible Rainbow, like in the early chapters, they're actually talking about the widespread adoption of electricity in the environment corresponding to negative health impacts and chronic illness, including diabetes and heart disease in the late 19th, early 20th century, when it became more widely spread, which I think as we're talking about diabetes management as an impact market, if the idea is that we're operating in a space that is polluted with chemicals and radiation, and then strapping behavioral monitoring devices on people and expecting in this video game world that they're going to be able to improve their health. It's a specious plan, really.
Yeah, one direct example is that the insulin monitors they're using use the 2.4 gigahertz standard, which itself has been found to induce insulin resistance and may destroy beta cells in the pancreas, furthering the condition. So it speaks to your overarching advocacy around making people aware that the surveillance technology is itself creating the market, maybe worsening the underlying condition.
Yeah. Well, and the impact investors, ultimately, they benefit from us being chronically ill. And that's one thing that I want to point out when I talk about it a little bit further, but the Rockefeller Foundation got into public health. Essentially, I mentioned this previously, but an imperial project that they were looking to improve the health of the laborers, in overseas locations, so that they could do the work that they needed. They didn't necessarily want them to be healthy just for their own personal benefit, but they wanted them to be strong workers. And if you imagine that the future is virtualized labor and robot labor, and that our function is to be behaviorally compliant citizens, really having populations that are chronically ill and confused and incapacitated is what will be profitable and most useful to them. Those in power don't really have any incentive for us to be robust, physically, mentally sharp individuals, because if so, we wouldn't put up with what they have planned. So since we first talked, and actually my friend the person who blogs at Steffers at Pizza Mindful, actually I give full credit. It was this, she brought this to my attention, and so she does a lot of work around biotech and military technology and other things. And she had surfaced this digital vaccine program. And I was like, oh my gosh, and at the time I didn't have a chance to really dig into it all, but I thought it was really relevant to this because, we're talking about diabetes impact markets, monitoring food intake, right? Monitoring physical activity. But then they've also are creating these new digital therapeutics where they're using, as you can see, artificial intelligence and persuasive computing and this neurobehavioral physiological modulation. So literally behaviorally programming people's minds with gamified programs. And these are specifically addressed to children. And so this digital vaccine program is coming out of, it's a company called Friends Learn, and they're working in partnership with Carnegie Mellon University. And let's see, so I'm gonna click over. Are you able to see this? Is it shifted over to a map now?
Yes. Okay,
great. So it's Friends Learn is over here. So Bhargav Sri Prakash, he created this gamified platform through his company Friends Learn, and it's called Fuya. And essentially Fuya is a digital video game that is supposed to train children to make healthy food choices, okay? Fuya is part of this digital vaccine project. And again, they're targeting obesity, social determinants of health, and behavioral economics, okay? So those are the things that they're focused on. It's in partnership with Carnegie Mellon and Hofstra University. So they're part of all of this, but there's a whole division now that's opening up with big pharma around digital therapeutics and behavior modification, especially geared for children, which is really deep, but it's something that people should be familiar with. And I had done some other blog posts on Achille Interactive, where their slogan is, it's time to play your medicine. Okay, so it's actual behavioral mental programming. This ostensibly linked to healthy food choices and management of pre-diabetic conditions. So when I looked a bit further into Fuya, other partners in this are the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, because CMU is based in Pittsburgh, but also Johns Hopkins, which we know has a very strong role in what's unfolding with the COVID research. But they're also working in, is it zooming in? Is it zooming in a bit?
I don't see it zoom.
No, okay, maybe not. Maybe it's just the screen. I don't know how interactive this is. So Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health is part of this, Stanford as well. And Stanford has innovative disruptive healthcare, wearable tech, and using data analytics in medicine and value-based programming. So that is really important to know. So, oh, you know what? It's not actually going over, but I think it'll be all right. So this is the game. It's important to know that they're using hero's journey types of technology to talk about this. And this is the gentleman, this is his LinkedIn profile, who created Friends Learn. And this is sort of the background of who gets into this. He worked in automotive simulation. So again, using technologies to simulate industrial processes, video gaming, real estate derivatives. Then he was a fellow in the social impact space. And then he moved on to digital vaccines. So that's pretty incredible if you think about it. I also forgot to mention Moderna. Friends Learn actually got into a big altercation with Moderna, fighting over the right to use the term digital vaccine.
Amazing.
So there are a lot of interchanges. And so clearly the idea of a digital vaccine is something that we need to be aware of. It's not just necessarily something that's going to puncture your skin. It could just as easily be that it's going to, bounce off the neurons of your brain and reprogram you.
Also, Alison, I would imagine this would further justify the agenda around the Internet of Bodies and using surveillance technology that goes all the way down to the cellular level so that they can justify this not being a traditional vaccine, but still having similar outcomes that they can measure.
Yeah. Well, and you can see from the tweet that's pinned, and this is pinned to the page of their Twitter feed, they identify it as precision medicine, okay? They also tagged the World Economic Forum and UNICEF. So we understand, like from my previous thing, that this is Sustainable Development Goal 3, and children are being targeted, and this will be a health target. So this isn't just some small thing. This is something that's meant to scale globally. And it's important to know that Carnegie Mellon does a lot of military contracting as well. And so then my question is, what are we training the kids to eat, right? What is that looking like? And, I spent some time, I'm sure your audience knows much more deeply about the history of the Codex Alimentarius, but the idea of standardizing, creating global food standards, and the use of those standards really as managing global trade in food. So these standards are not health standards per se, they're standards around managing corporate trade of commodities. And so in 2000, this is a report that they did. So again, 20 years ago, with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, is that they have this task force on foods derived from biotechnology. So this is a several hundred page report, but essentially 20 years ago, they were already talking about biotech foods. Now, I would say most people, even if we know GMO, we understand, I don't normally consider it as biotechnology, but even 20 years ago, that was their focus. Now, someone else alerted me to this article that was from early January, I believe, from Monbiot. He's all over the place as the thinker, and he's saying that we're going to have lab-grown food. It will destroy farming and save the planet. So this is the direction. This is the context, right? Like, so we're going to use the threat of health optimization, digital threat, like health optimization as a central feature. We're going to say we're not going to have natural farming anymore, and that we are going to have essentially printed goo, as our food. And we're going to train the children with a video game to accept that. Again, you had brought to my attention a number of folks that now Bill Gates is securing the farmland. And, we've been hearing for a long time about Agenda 21 and displacement of people off of land. And, clearly we're already in a situation where industrial agriculture, there are very large corporate landowners, but as far as individuals, now Bill Gates leads in the United States in terms of owning farmland. And so what is Bill Gates going to be growing on the farmland that he owns? He also this past year, or I think it was last year, developed a new innovative agricultural research institute called Gates Ag One that's targeting agriculture in Africa and South Asia. So, we can see that this is global. The last green revolution was about essentially creating global commodities trade, and much of which meant that countries took on incredible amounts of debt from the World Bank and the IMF that kept them, under the thumb of the global banking interests. They were forced to make commodities for export as opposed to feeding their own people, and then use the GMO seeds and the pesticides. So now we've moved on to what is the next green revolution. Evidently, it's bioprinted food and goo in tubes. But this is the Rockefeller. They're talking about resetting the table. So now with COVID will be the cover and the justification. This is from last July to transform the U.S. food system. Only it's not just going to be the U.S. food system. It'll be the global system. So again, the Rockefeller Foundation has its ties. It started the Green Revolution in the post-war era. And they have always used public health and nutrition as a means of controlling the global population and food access and deciding what food is. And that is all wrapped up in the program of impact management and diabetes and agriculture. So increasingly, we're seeing with the fourth industrial revolution, it's about synthetic biology, it's about AI, it's about predictive analytics. So they're going to use your genomic information, and they're going to say they're going to use that information to optimize you, right? But who gets to pick what the optimal human looks like? It's not going to be the regular folks deciding what this optimal, healthy human is. It's going to be the biotech markets, right? The life sciences, they are going to engineer us so that they can keep engineering us. So this idea of personalized nutrition, they're going to just pull your genomics and then tell you what you're going to eat.
Sounds a lot like eugenics.
It is. It's based in eugenics. All of this is. And, I don't think most of us were anticipating that even as problematic as GMO foods were, that now they're looking at creating edible vaccines so that you could have a GMO that would fundamentally change your cellular structure. But they're going to call it personalized nutrition. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, my concern, as I expressed in the last interview, is that we will have limited choices to not participate in the system, particularly if you are dependent on having food assistance from the state, whatever state you're in. If you are not independently able to secure your own food and maintain your own seed stock and clean your own water, because the nanotechnology that we're talking about will be caught up in the water system, it's going to be hard to stay outside of that. But the idea of having this edible vaccine that could theoretically turn you into a genetically modified organism. And again, this is coming out of the Cornell Alliance for Science. And we know Cornell is connected to Cornell Technion and the Small Data Lab that's advancing Common Pass. Individuals there advancing the Common Pass geofencing project tied to COVID. Essentially, you sort of feel like we are trapped as pets, zoo animals in this sort of billionaires program.
If I could add to Alison that Gates on his blog wrote that the mRNA platform literally turns your cells into vaccine manufacturing factories. Very colloquial way of describing the transhumanistic implications of that technology. So just to affirm what you were saying.
Yeah. And I don't want to be a factory. I don't want to be made up of cell factories. And especially if what's being advanced is not consensual and not, with liability waivers, right? Mm. So this was an interesting report that I found that was just actually from last January. And I think it speaks to, increasingly people are interested in understanding, the very sophisticated and beautiful structures that allow life to exist, and evolve. And, a big part of that is the microbiome, right? And, just to think of the fact that we're sort of our own little universe, that a lot of us, of what we think of as us isn't actually us. It's other individual creatures living in us and with us and helping our bodies work the way they need to work and adapt to our environment the way we need to adapt. And so now this is essentially being caught up in the biotech sector, right? So whereas we know it's important, these sources of like profit extraction are now latching on to mapping the microbiome and creating new profit centers out of it. So this is a report called The Microbiome, Diet, and Health Towards a Science and Innovation Agenda. All right, so innovation, that's like code word for, we're going to come up with some disruptive things to, make some money off of. But they're mapping the microbiome, and they're talking about, I'll just read the underlined section. The agro-food sector, again, like food tech, biotechnology companies, and diagnostic companies to pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, animal nutrition, and health. The technology developers are also involved, and interest may extend even to app developers for personal health monitoring to keep track of personal diet for a better gut biome. That companies have been focusing on each of those for development, right? So they're going to engineer you with these monitoring devices if they get away with it. And that's where we see things like shop with your DNA. And I had mentioned the last time out that the NHS in the UK was actually acquiring systems that was COVID testing systems that had this DNA nudge capacity embedded in them. Now, another thing that is quite worrisome, this is AgBiome, is a company that Gates is invested in, as well as some of the other like big agricultural GMO seed companies. They are doing essentially genomic sequencing of microbes and turning that into biotech products. But they have just recently pivoted, and they're using the technology that they had advanced around microbes and genomics to create gene therapies for humans. And the name of it is called Life Edit. Huh. And so I guess the Life Edit therapeutics, and who is editing? Who is editing, and to what end are they editing us? And how many people even know that this is possible? The agriculture, you can see like it's an overlap of agriculture, animal life, and human life, and microbial life. And these entities that really don't even understand how all of it operates are developing therapeutics. In many cases, as we've seen with the rollout of COVID, is that we're looking at population level bioengineering of everyone, people like who aren't even seriously ill. And so that is part of this transhumanist program. So here I'm gonna, you know what? I'm not going to be able to zoom in because I think you're only going to be able to see this slide, and I don't think I can zoom it in closer. But I will speak to that just briefly. This touches on the Green Revolution, which is the larger red dot. It touches on the Ford Foundation and the Rockefeller Foundation as being the originators of that and the advancers of this industrial agricultural program. It talks to the Consultative Group for Agricultural Research, which is based in Mexico, where a lot of that early research took place around corn and wheat, and that many of the global banking interests, all of the development banks are part of that, because a key part of the agricultural reset is to make countries dependent on large loans to remake their agricultural program, to buy the GMO seeds, to buy the hydroponics, to buy the aeroponics, to buy not only the chemical fertilizers and pesticides, but now the nanotechnology to allow the plants to live through the pesticide applications. And that is all about setting up debt and creating food systems that aren't nutritive, right? That don't have that level of nutrition. Over here on one of the green dots, we have the Gates Foundation and their innovative agricultural program. So this is the next green revolution that is coming on board. And then on the right-hand side, there's a lot around nanotechnology in agriculture. That this new version of Agriculture 4.0 is about drones and UAVs. It's about bioprinting, and it's about using CRISPR technologies. And the agri-tech increasingly is using nanotechnology, and these tiny, tiny particles at the nanoscale, the normal laws of physics don't apply. And they are using nanotechnology in agricultural applications without even having a clear understanding of what the long-term effects are on soil health and the microbes in the soil and the invertebrates in the soil and what it means for the water cycle. And so part of this, the reason I'm talking about this today is the University of Pennsylvania, where I'm based here in Philadelphia, like they have a large nanotechnology center, and one of the key individuals who's advancing precision agriculture is connected with that. And they just got a $26 million grant from the NSF last year to work with the Penn Grasp Lab, the robotics lab, to develop nanotech agriculture and more drone swarms to use in agriculture.
Alison, quick question. The little cyst graphs, I know at one point, I think the count was locked down. Is that available for after this presentation?
Yeah, so I'm able to make some more maps. Most people will be able to get in. They did restore the maps.
Good. Okay, great.
So I'm covert at the moment. Okay. I'm saving them in the Wayback Machine as I go along. So I will share the slides with you, and this will be a hot link. The link at the bottom can open it up and be interactive.
Great.
So I think at the top of this is the Codex Alimentarius. So this slide is essentially touching on the Rockefeller and Ford foundations around industrial agriculture, Bill Gates picking up and complementing those efforts, the role of global finance in resetting agriculture to create more debt and more health problems in the food systems, and then essentially using this biotech, nanotech, agritech, food tech to hijack natural systems of independent agriculture and autonomy around food systems, and then tying it into this larger matrix of this militarized augmented reality video game. So, so the reason I invited the individual who had started this impact fund around resilient agriculture, I invited this person. I said, I would love to have a conversation with you to talk about health impact bonds, because most people don't know about health impact bonds. They don't know about diabetes impact bonds, but the first one is just coming online. It just came online in 2019 in Sweden. And so I would ask that those of us who are sort of being conditioned to look up to Sweden as this great country that's doing all the right things, is that we need to understand that Sweden is sort of is in the vanguard of fourth industrial revolution, automation and robotics and smart technologies. Okay, so Sweden and a lot of the Nordic countries are very far in advance. And so while they may be good at doing things we like, and one thing that we should not unconditionally try to be Sweden, because there are issues with Sweden. So Sweden is hosting this first health impact bond. It's tied in with something called health as a service startup. So now your health is a service, like a cloud-based service. And again, knowing that the cloud is a military space, that's pretty interesting. Like your health is a service to be mined for data, and that healthy lives and behavior change will be part of these bond markets. So surveillance and behavior change, measurable behavior change, are key. And in the partners in this deal included social finance, which is based in the UK and Israel. But we have also social finance here in the United States. That's Sir Ronald Cohen, that's Michael Bloomberg, that's Goldman Sachs. That's all the people who want to keep track of you just to keep you healthy because they care. I'll briefly just touch on this map. And I know, unfortunately, with the interface, I can't zoom in and get closer. But this talks about produce RX. So actually giving people prescriptions for produce. And again, imagine that in the context of this Allegria Farms, tabletop farms, potentially farms grown with socks of soil. They call them soil socks. So tubes of special soil, like what is in the special soil? Is this a biotech ag biome? But it's only the good kind of biotech, right? It's only the good kind of things grown in these tubes on tabletops, just for the best nutrition, because we want the poor to have the best nutrition. And you will scan them with your public benefit card with your DNA nudge band, right? To check off that you did your produce subscription.
Can I just point out too, Alison,
Yeah.
In your previous talk, you helped to shed light on the dark side of the blockchain and the implications behind replicating the dystopian social credit system that was rolled out in China here using programmable money, where they'll have infinitesimal control in real time of what you buy, where you go, pretty much what services you have access to. So just wanted to tie that into your last talk.
Yeah, no, very much so. And I mean, my concern, I know they're talking a bit more about providing assistance through these like Fed accounts, through the central banking. This is the impact, the human capital impact investing is running through the central banking systems. So these digital wallets that are keep popping up, that is ultimately their goal, is that you will have a digital wallet with social benefits embedded, whether that is your access to housing, healthcare, food, education and training, but the money will be programmable. And when it's a digital wallet, it lives on a device, and those devices have SIM cards, and those SIM cards can be remotely deactivated, right? Like very quickly. And I was seeing in our city, because we had a special poverty committee, where we are a poor city, but the poverty committee was never really coming up with good solutions. We are also a pilot city for what's called the Benefits Data Trust. So their intention is to get as many people using as many public services as possible, which on the one hand, certainly people are entitled, and I'm not here to like rip apart the social safety net. But if it's about surveillance and human capital impact investing, that's a very different matter. And I've spoken to that, talking about the indigenous populations and the reservation systems, where people were stripped of their economic independence and then forced into reliance on a government that did not have their best interests at heart. I feel like that is the model that's coming. So this Benefits Data Trust is connected to the Mark Zuckerberg, their health initiative and their data analytics system. So imagine that this digital wallet, your Benefits Data Trust, they're tracking your compliance, your behavioral compliance to your prescription, right? And you're being prescribed a certain food. And my question is, given what we know is happening with the reset of the food system under the umbrella of climate change, but that is really about creating a biotech, agritech, nanotech, controlled, engineered food system that ultimately intends to engineer you into a new type of cybernetic human that will interface with this 5 and 6G technology. Should we have a right to refuse that? And I think we should. So this speaks to this. As soon as I saw those tabletop farms, the Alegria farm system, I'm like, oh, it's exactly like this produce program. And this is being piloted in Washington, D.C. So again, most of this stuff, it's racialized. Communities that don't have as much say, like the District of Columbia, they become the pilot programs. And the program was called DC Greens. And so they're doing things that sound really great. And I would say probably most of the people on the ground working in these programs don't understand the bigger picture and don't see how a problem of like a food box of vegetables could ever be a problem. But what I'm saying is, if the investors in these programs are Amazon, giant healthcare systems like Optum, Open Society and George Soros, and then you have something called Socially Connected, which is a data dashboard tracking people's behavior, that's when it becomes problematic, because they might start out with like the nice, lacinato kale bundles, and then eventually it turns into vaccinated GMO kale, because that's what your genomic sequence for your precision nutrition says that you're allowed to have. And that's what we have to intervene on. And all of it is linked to pay for success. That's sort of the bottom corner, the black dot, and the bottom left is that linked to diabetes, heart disease, obesity, that will all be connected. So This is just speaking to this impact bond. This is the Swedish impact bond. It's interesting that it's funded by the SEB group, which is a banking group. But the chairman of that is Jacob Wahlberg, who he is connected to the Wahlberg family, which is one of the wealthiest European families, banking families, financier families. And surprise, surprise, he got his MBA at Wharton here in Philadelphia, right? So this is a global program, folks. Even if it's in Sweden, Israel's hands are in on it and Wharton's hands are in on it. The other investor in this bond was Scandia, which is a insurance company. But Scandia is actually also involved in collective impact investing, which is very big here. And that's the pay for success model. So again, global. This is connected to something called the Health Movement Project. And the Health Movement Project is doing nutrition apps. The nutrition app is called Whisper, and there's also a health integrator. And the health integrators is backed by like your own personal health management app. All of these venture capital companies. The Research Institutes of Sweden has its hand in this. This is part of the Health Movement program. They're also involved in smart textiles, smart fabrics, Internet of Things fabrics, and working on smart shirts. So when we talk about not only managing people as their nutrition consumption, and if they're taking their precision food in, but what is their physical activity level, and like how would you know? Well, you make a smart shirt and you make them walk around. Which sounds crazy, but like I mapped it. That's why I mapped these things out so people can see how they interface. Do all of the different parts all know about each other? I don't know. And I think in that way, they often have plausible deniability.
Yes.
So, you know, I'm just doing this over here. I don't know anything about the smart shirt. Well, I'm only doing the app. You know, I don't know that there's a planetary diet that's going to make me eat genomically based printed food. And that's what I'm trying to surface is sort of these bigger things. The assessing the economic costs of unhealthy diets and low activity. So they need someone to do the equation. That was the equation. It was backed by the European Observatory on Health Systems, which is the World Health Organization, the World Bank, the London School of Economics, and the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, all of whom have a hand in the COVID lockdown. So they lock us down and then we get unhealthy and stressed. And then now eventually when the lockdown comes off, or I'll get smart shirts and food stamps in a digital wallet.
Well, also Amazon released their distance assistant where it, surveils in real time the distance between individuals, and they want to roll this out open source for the world so that they can just sort of consolidate their gains in this operation. In fact, just real quick, the Event 201 is such good context for those who are new to this conversation because it was architected by the World Economic Forum and the Gates Foundation and Bloomberg, right, School of Health Security.
Yeah.
And so we have such a clear fingerprint on what led to this, and even like things like eliminating paper money because now it's dirty and you have to get within 6 feet of another human, which is considered deadly. So this whole narrative has made possible this infrastructure that you're showing us is going to be used to create this entirely new technocratic world and these markets that you're bringing to our attention.
Yeah. I mean, they're going to treat us like machines, like robot bees, upload our consciousness into some sort of, you said it, they want to turn our cells into factories and they don't really know what they're doing. They admit they're just starting to map the microbiome. Why would you then create whole new markets in precision nutrition foods if you don't know? You're doing it because it's a depopulation program and you have no respect for most people and you find them disposable. But most people, they're not even aware that that's happening. I think I might have spoken about this in my last talk a little bit, but I wasn't sure I had a slide. The microbiome analysis mapping, so the NIH, and this is like the NIAD, the Allergies Institute, like that's Fauci. They've just started mapping the microbiome. So that's what I'm saying. They're messing around with stuff that they admit they don't really know what it is. And so this Nephili program is a cloud computing program to map the microbiome. here in Philadelphia, there's a lot of like energetical, mystical stuff going on, including Johannes Kelpius, who was an early Christian mystic monk and supposedly one of the first Rosicrucians in North America. And outside this cave where he was said to live, there's a monument. And on the side, it says Nephili. That's Nephili in Greek. So I included that here just to talk about, I think, moving forward as we understand the control system, that the links between the gut and the gut biome, gut health, and your mental, your brain function, and the desire of those in power to control both of those, to pivot into a virtualized world that is based on avatars and gamification, that they are literally looking to grab hold of both our gut and our minds. And who was in Philadelphia who wrote Nephili on the side of that marker? I do not know, but I think it's very significant. So this map touches a bit on the microbiome. In the bottom section, it talks about the Nephili and the myth. It was a Greek myth of a cloud goddess who impersonated Hera and then gave rise to the centaurs. And they're talking about centaurs and cyborgs. There was a program by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD, where they were talking about using the microbiome, diet, and health towards this innovation agenda. So that's the unlocking the markets. And then this speaks to the ag biome. I mentioned that previously about the life edit therapeutics. So they've merged managing the microbia elements of the soil systems into life sciences for human interventions and human therapeutics. But the investors in that company include Novozymes, which is a spinoff of Novo Nordisk, which is involved in the diabetes space. Syngenta, which is the GMO seed provider that's owned by ChemChina, and Bayer Crop Science. And of course, Bayer links back to IG Farben, which is, played such a key role in the Holocaust and worker camps. So these are the entities that are investing in understanding microbiomes, not just for managing agriculture, but actually for specifically managing people. And what I want to connect with the blockchain is that they want to engineer everything. And so not only will your credits be on potentially in a decentralized database, encrypted database system, but all of your health data, including tracking your genomic information. They're already setting up companies to track and upload your genomic data onto blockchain. And there's a microbiome center in the Netherlands. There's a video where they have partnered with Ledger Leopard on blockchain, and they're talking about how wonderful it is to coordinate your healthcare and payment systems through the blockchain. So I know there's a lot about blockchain electronic health records that's going to be coming online. Delaware is a center and a pioneer in that. And clearly that's something that Biden, the people around Biden would know a lot about. But this Leopard Ledger company, actually, they advance tracking healthcare systems for the first blockchain baby in the Netherlands. Okay. So if you imagine that the blockchain would hold your value, your ability to transact in the world, your genomic sequencing, your behavioral elements, and potentially even down to your microbiome level, that's pretty intense. If you see how it intersects with big pharma, big ag, going back to the Holocaust and investment commodities, and then with a smidgen of references to Greek mythology, right? It's a lot. But I think the microbiome is really important. And I know people know a lot more about that than I do, but I just want to point that out and surface it, that I think that the big finance and big military and big pharma really have their hands all over that system.
Alison, I just want to add, for those listening, I know that some people are like, oh my God, this is so dark. What do we do? And I know you opened with a real positive reminder about the things we can do. And we'll close with that as well. So. Yeah. Hold on, it's okay. We can all get through this. We're adults here, and the truth is shocking, and but we can handle it, and let's go through it together.
Yeah. Well, and I will say too, I really appreciated your interview with Alana Freeland, and she's talking about all these heavy things because I'm talking about some of it, but nano is part of it. The nanotech, and she talks about trying to figure out how to work with it, right? How do you work in collective consciousness? They have their idea of what a hive mind consciousness is, but we have our own systems, systems of life. And so I do think that life will prevail. I just think we should know what we're in. I don't know, maybe some people would prefer not to know what we're in, and that's fine too. But to me, once I know it, I feel like I'm a little bit more in control of it.
Well, and also, Alison, I would say in this moment, this time, I don't think we even have a choice any longer of putting our heads in the sand any longer. So I think you're doing us all a favor by showing us how the dots connect on this global level.
Yeah, but hers is a good one too to follow up with, I would say. So then now it's going to get even a little bit more weird. So I talked about precision medicine, precision agriculture, potentially precision education, gaming, behavior management. Like, since we talked, I actually connected, or I can't remember if I mentioned it in my last talk. I'm doing so many these days, but about this idea of avatars, and that their interest in this game that is unfolding, that actually are imagining life as happening in cybernetic systems, not simply as necessarily just as having human bodies with injections of biotechnology or nanotechnology that might lead us to becoming cyborgs in some sense, but actually living as digital characters, like that our mind advances in space as like a gamified entity, avatar situation. And so there are some wonderful teachers that I connected with in Tokyo, and they're like, have you seen this Moonshot paper? And many people send me things, and I apologize. I don't always get a chance to read all of it, and I hadn't, but I went back and I'm like, oh my gosh, this Moonshot project. The Japan Office of Science and Tech, the Japan Science and Technology Agency has this program called the Moonshot Research and Development Goals in their cabinet office. And they're actually talking about a new form of virtualization of the world. And of course, for Japan, they're talking about an aging population. But also, you can see I've underlined global warming as their justification for why we have to become digital cartoons. And this is one of the slides from their Moonshot project. And you can see sort of the weaponization of narrative, because they're using the word diversity. And I think we all, are understanding, like, we like diversity, right? Like, the world is richer with a lot of different kinds of people with different viewpoints and respect of one another. But they're using it in a different way. So they're actually talking about diversity with robots. And I think I tweeted this. I'm like, I'm pretty sure the people doing all the diversity trainings are not realizing that in the end, we're supposed to have diversity with robots and nanotechnology and avatars. But this is from the Moonshot program. And they say by 2050, okay, so 30 years from now, or like not quite, a little bit less, that they would like to have a society, they call it Society 5.0, in which human beings are free from the limitations of body, brain, science, and time. So they're reimagining that having a body and a brain in any kind of physical respect is solely a limitation. And that really can only exist in the kind of world where you say, like, no one can come within 6 feet of one another, right? Like, that may ultimately be a drag. If you have a physical body, you can never actually use it for anything, right? You can't hug people. You can't, like, so they're trying to normalize that, like, we should just get beyond our body because it's just a dead weight, as opposed to like a beautiful sacred like container of electrical, water, and minerals that we're doing things with, in the time that we have, right? Spirit having, a body experience. But this is the transhumanist part. So we've talked about the finance, we've talked about engineered behavior, we've talked about using technology and digital benefits to make you eat things that might not be to your long-term benefit. And then ultimately, the stuff we eat may be facilitating a transition to this cyborg future. The other piece is, and I would encourage folks to maybe take a look at this paper, this gentleman, I think his name's Ian Achildes, he's at Georgia Tech, he's advancing the internet of bio-nano things. So using nanotechnology, and they're saying that the goal is interfaces between the electrical domain of the internet and the biochemical domain of the internet of bio-nano things. And that will be the ultimate frontier to create a seamless interconnection between the cyber world and the biological environment. So they are really looking to blur the physical body and electrical engineering. And I understand this like as a colonization, that this is what and when we understand why it's so hard to stop 5G, if we understand that it's because they're demanding this thing. And this article is from 2010. This is a slide share from the same professor. So yeah, that was a decade ago. There were people out in the world who thought that this is how we want to live. And it's a bit overwhelming to imagine that this is going on and that the media isn't telling us and that no one is having an informed conversation about, do we get to say no? What about those of us who don't want to live like that? And who is this serving? Because I think the important thing to understand is, again, this is a militarized space. Is that somebody's nice modern living room, or is that a prison cell? What is it like to live in a panopticon? And I think understanding behavior control and behavioral engineering is so vital, because they need our brains to go along with this. Like, if we actually conceptualize that this was the plan, people would refuse. But they need to control, like hijack our thought process into this world. And I don't believe it will ultimately happen, but their intention is that this would never happen if we were in full possession of our faculties. And so the goal is to sort of break things down through food systems, through energetic systems, through these technologies, to create this ubiquitous environment in which we blend with the world.
Alison, also this happens in medicine, where the medical system is so devastating that those who do resist often get then kicked into the psychiatric realm, where then they chemically manipulate. So same parallel.
Yeah. Well, and this is what I want to talk about. Like, when we talk about the like that diabetes, the digital vaccine, it's actually training your neurons. Like, there is I mean, I will just say, like, I have someone in my household who works at who, I'm hearing a lot about young people wanting to go into cognitive neuroscience. I will just say that. Lots. And it's to make that happen. And like, I keep wondering, like, if you were 19 and someone showed you that, will you find that attractive? Like, because to me, who is in control of that system? I don't think the person in that picture is in control of the system. I think it will ultimately be AI operating on behalf of very powerful beings that are in control of that system. So the behavior modification, the neural pathways, the emphasis on executive function and grit and resilience are about crafting, especially the younger people, right? I mean, the young adults, but especially the toddlers, into this world. Because again, the Japan thing was saying 2050. So the baby of today is the 30-year-old of 2050. They have to pretty much make sure that those babies don't know that there's some other way of being other than to be a character in a mixed reality game. The digital twinning, I think, is a big part of this. And, I referenced this in a blog post a few months ago, but the idea of, they have been building digital twins of mechanical systems for a long time, of infrastructure, of machines. Like I said, the guy who did the digital vaccine was doing simulations of automotive, simulations of airplanes, simulations of cars. Engineers make digital simulations, and then they put them through their paces and they do testing on them, and then they refine them. But the intention is that they plan to digitally twin individual human beings and social systems. That is the next phase of the digital twinning. And that is where, like, when we look at the brain and the ubiquitous computing, is all of that electrical signaling is to build and aggregate data for the digital twinning process. This is something that was shared with me this week. It was coming through the social media feeds about Microsoft patenting a chatbot based on a specific person. So this is the patent. It was from last December. So again, there's another Black Mirror episode about that. The person's partner dies in a car accident, and they recreate them based on the semantic analysis of their text, their digital dust. They remake the person. Now, this is still just a chatbot. I think in that episode, ultimately, you could upgrade to a robot with an uploaded consciousness. But this is, here you go, some more Black Mirror. I think this is maybe my last map. This is a company called Dassault Systems. It was involved in essentially, I think, aeronautics early on, in aviation, but other digital systems and telecom systems. It's sort of one of these larger global entities. It's based in France, but they have a presence in Rhode Island as well. They acquired a company called Metadata Solutions. And this company was working with Moderna on doing modeling around mRNA, and also that the company was doing digital twins for healthcare. So some of the healthcare management programming may be related to ultimately building up a set to create a digital twin. And some of this, I think, is cover for these larger agendas. I think a lot of the R&D around cancer research is really about gene therapies, maybe not even for cancer. But that money is used in that way ostensibly for cancer, but now applied to many other things. I think the same for brain science research, the Brain Project, and maybe it's about Alzheimer's, but maybe it's about also understanding systems better for creating artificial intelligence and supercomputing, understanding the biological systems and then using them for dual purpose, other purposes. So this digital twin, I think, is another dual purpose. They will say that here we're going to create a digital twin so that we can test and see if this chemotherapy is going to work for your genomic sequencing. Isn't this a great idea? But the infrastructure for that digital twinning, I think, could easily feed into this cyborg society 5.0 scenario, especially because Dassault is also working on virtual reality systems, and they're working with Microsoft on a virtual Earth system, Earth modeling. Again, that will advance under the framing of addressing the climate crisis, and sustainable development goals. So we'll virtualize the Earth with Microsoft. We should just be so grateful, even though Microsoft is also, helping run global policing systems. And, I'm speaking to this a bit because the 3D experience, some of it will be health-based, but some of it will also be education-based. And one of their outposts is in Rhode Island, which is very much into electronic government, blockchain, pay-for-success finance. They have a neoliberal Democratic governor, Gina Raimondo. I don't know if she's still going to be staying in Rhode Island, but under her leadership, they were advancing all sorts of pay-for-success deals and educational technology, and they were a pilot for personalized learning. So if you understand that not only is your health data potentially going to feed into digital twinning, but that your education and training will be too, and then look, if we have digital vaccines, that there's an overlap, right? Your virtual quote unquote education or your sort of mental health training as far as what's appropriate starts to overlap within managing you as a health commodity. So I think I'm getting close to the end now. This is just another slide share from the Moonshot project. Again, if people don't believe me, I encourage you to look it up. I don't want to believe that this is real. They had a symposium in 2019, but they're talking about this cybernetic avatar society and specifically as using it to drive capitalism. Those are their words, not my words. And that it's going to have diversity inclusion. So some of this stuff I think is word spells, the way in which they use language to obscure and confuse. But that's a pretty weighty topic, right? Cybernetic avatar capitalism for diversity and inclusion. And it's important to understand, some people will say, well, that's just Japan. I don't, how does that have to do anything with me? But Japan is running Nippon Telegraph and Telecom. They're advancing 6G and the digital twinning. And they're running SoftBank, and SoftBank has all of the Saudi Arabia sovereign wealth fund money that's being put into driving these systems. And it's a global system. I mean, the cloud-based world is something that is global. So we all need to grapple with it. It's not just a nation-based program that they're putting forward. Japan, they are all about the robots. I mean, they've piloted recently a program where people who are disabled can work through a robot in a cafe. Wow. And they frame this as this wonderful liberation, right? Oh, look, you have MS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. You're in a hospital bed, but you can still work in the cafe. And my deep and grave concern, because often these populations, it's marginalized populations, it's racialized, but it's also disabled people are targets of these technologies early on. And if this becomes a program tied to your accessing a benefit, if you want to continue to get your health care, if you want to continue to be fed, you're going to work serving lattes in a cafe. from your hospital bed, from your pallet in your house. There's a lot of ethical questions about this. And I will say in Philadelphia, like our poverty committee, one of the early programs, they talked about the elderly needing to work. We need to reskill all the elderly so they can continue to work. I'm like, if we're having the fourth industrial revolution and everything's automated, why in the world would you have the elderly work? Why would you not just take care of them? And it's because they need to keep them all busy so that they don't revolt and teach the young people what things that they're not supposed to know. So this is DigiTwins. This is a program of the EU. Again, there are like dozens and dozens of corporate healthcare entities tied in to create these digital twins. And then the question is like, people are always like, why would we do this? Why would we do this? But it's about money. It's about the Great Reset. And it's ultimately, I think, a digital coup. I think we're in a battle, I often say, of sacred versus profane. That the people at the top trying to make money off of the folks at the bottom, and that the stuff that's going to be coming online now, it's going to come under the framing of ESG investing, environmental, social, and governance. And they're going to frame it as that they're the saviors of the planet for putting their money into systems that regulate our bodies and our lived experience. And BlackRock is a central player in this. Again, it's all tied to the Sustainable Development Goals. When people say, who are the they? And these are the people I point out. I'm like, it's the Impact Management Project. They're 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders, and they're aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals. And that little arrow there is the wedge between hunger and health. And that's the space that we're working in. If you're creating a social impact regenerative agriculture fund, that's the space you're in. You're between hunger and health and digital wearable technology and GMO management. Again, this is from July 2020. They're already talking about this new form of agriculture tied to the Sustainable Development Goals, but it's ICT. It's individual communication technology. It's technological agriculture that is essentially going to end with robot bees and cyborg people. It looks like that. That drones don't touch the soil. There's a smart field. I mean, the USDA is advancing all of this. Like our tax money is paying for this. The NSF is funding nanotech agriculture at the University of Pennsylvania. And no one is stopping to say, well, what does it mean to have a soil full of nanotech? Who is going to stand for the earthworms? Who is going to stand for the beetles and the cicadas and who will stand? Because the image on the right, that is my vision of being connected in local food systems. It's a sacred practice. It's not an industrialized practice. This next level of industrialization, I think, may very well end the earth if we don't refuse it. And so I think I'm getting close to closing, but I've connected with some folks who are trying to help translate this message to a wider audience, which I'm very grateful for, because I do things one way, but it's certainly not the only way. And in many respects, I know some people find it difficult and confusing, and I'm sorry for that. I'm doing my best to try to figure out how to tell it better. But they came up with actually a really beautiful structure to think about it. And it was, the goal is to actually share it with the Black community, to talk about like the role of the Black body in an enslavement in this new system of human capital finance and sort of biosecurity, biotech, panopticon that is coming. And so the framework was talking about capture, inject, trace, and erase. And that's Ulysses Slaughter and Brother Shamari. I'm working with them on that. And so the capture, like we can see how the capture is happening, both physical and mental. The injection, both of actual physical into the physical body, but also into the spirit. The tracing is all of the digital twinning, right? And then the erasure of the human, whether through physical death or through the creation of sort of a transhumanistic cyborg entity. And that this has this history in, again, the slave trade, in my mind. This is how I think about it. And the Zong Massacre, which is something a lot of people aren't familiar with, but it was a situation where it was tied to early insurance, maritime trade insurance. And the ship hit the doldrums, and the bodies, the enslaved people, were insured for drowning, but not starvation or dying of lack of water. And so they started throwing humans, these sacred people, over into the ocean to get the insurance payment. It's an insurance program. And that actually catalyzed a lot of movement in England around abolition of slavery. So it's important to see the continuity, because I was reading a report from Rand about the Internet of Bodies. And at the back, it said, well, who paid for this report? Who paid for Rand to do this report? And his name was Jacques Dubois. And he was recent, and it was just him. It wasn't him and a bunch of other foundations. Usually it's like about 6 foundations. It was just him. But he's the retired former chair of Swiss Re America, which is one of the largest global reinsurance companies. So they know this stuff is bad and it's going to be crappy. And it really is about insurance, and it's about gambling on bodies. And I think, and we spoke to this, Sarah, about the cell as factory, that this is a colonial project. It's an imperial project. This is, again, one of these papers about biotech and the bio-nano things. For them, they just see cells as a computer. How do we engineer this device? How can we hack it? How can we make it into what we want it to be? And this speaks very closely, again, my friend Steffer shared this with me, about the machine. They're trying to train up the youth to believe that this is the way to go. And you can see this crowd. And again, no individualization. It's just color and faces. But this is a gathering around synthetic biology. They're pushing the youth for so long. It was STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. Now it's going to be synthetic biology. It's not even all STEM anymore. They really just want people to do genetic engineering. And so this was a competition, an annual competition in the genetically engineered machine, right? Your cells as machines. And this program has been going on since 2003, right? I mean, so there are whole cohorts of people out there who think that it is okay to engineer the human body, and not just humans, like all of life, as a machine, and that is a good thing to do. And I just saw this image because it was really upsetting to me. This is a dark thing that we're going up against, and I don't think we have any choice other than to refuse it. I mean, I don't think we have any other choice. And I think this is my last slide. So, oh, good, hour and a half. That's pretty good. And if people have questions after, I'm happy to go back in. But it's enslavement, and it's a settler colonizer. Okay, so settler colonialism is the idea of coming into a space and not just taking over resources and pulling the existing inhabitants into your program and making them do what you want, but to actually eliminate them, to erase them entirely, to erase their beingness, their physical bodies, their culture, to make it gone. And that's a different type of colonization than other types. And when I talk about the indigenous experience, we need to sort of grapple with that, because I think there are lessons to be learned for us going forward, and understanding that, and this is something I've been putting out there, is that artificial intelligence is the next settler colonizer. That the takeover of life on the planet by AI is this next erasure, potentially, of all natural life, to the loss of engineering. And the image, this is a very compelling image that's often used. It's manifest destiny, sort of saying, like, there's no other way but forward. This is we're remaking this space for this new vision. And then we have Elon Musk, right? So this neural link, the brain, implants this idea that we have to join with the hive mind, to that we don't have other choices. And I would refuse that. I think we do have other choices, and we must make that other choice, because it's not just for ourselves and our families and our communities, but it's even, I've said this before, but it's for the unborn. You don't go back once we're all connected to the internet through these biological systems. We just don't go back. And so, so that's, I guess I can detach from the thing, but that's sort of where I'm at. It started being really upset with tabletop agriculture. And it got bigger, right? It got a lot bigger. But I think, again, if you imagine that image of the table, the food pantry parking lot, Bank of America, a nudge band, potentially some sort of, I'm sure it will be framed as a lovely biotech intervention in the soil socks, that is the thing that we have to interrogate closer. Yes. And I think we will. I don't mean to be the downer. So I think there's too much beauty in the world and there's too much complexity, and these people don't actually have it all nailed down. They actually don't. But we have to not be lulled into complacency.
Well, Alison, I find so much of what you shared to be just very compelling. And, a lot of questions are around what do we do, of course. And, one thing I will say that comes up for me, especially given what you just showed us with capture, inject, trace, erase, it's very powerful because the capture part is the, if you will, Orwellian inversion. You look at the UN sustainable goals and their entrance into regenerative agriculture. It sounds wonderful. And there's so many good, decent people that have yet to take, if you will, the red pill of this type of information, because it's very hard to live in both places. Decent people, when they really understand the implications of this information, it's actually a trauma, and it will cause potentially, right, more dissociation, more triggering, and we see how that expresses in conventional bipartisan activism. It's really toxic. So I will say, though, that you're giving us sort of the playbook, which is we do end up consenting on the front end to so many of these agendas, often because we're well-meaning and we think we have good friends that maybe lead us into the path there. But what you're asking us to do is wake up and to really adultify and see. It's so clear right now that so much is at stake, and you're showing us that there are things we can do. Now, I will just add that I feel the most important lesson of this window for me has been that the more I participate in the system, it could be Amazon or it could be, using my smartphone, I'm actually constantly giving over my energy, my prana, and my data, which they're weaponizing and monetizing against me or through me. And that is where we actually do have the answer. We started chickens. We just released them into the coop. We have 8 of them now. No more eggs from, Instacart or whatever company. And we have, organic vegetables now. We're working on that. And that's a great privilege that we can even afford to do that. What I'm suggesting is that people embrace that path of finding your gift and then sharing it with your community. It doesn't require the intermediation of any kind of fiat currency or blockchain.
Yeah.
We can start developing a potlatch kind of consciousness around just basically becoming better versions of ourselves and then sharing with one another. And that is one thing I think that everyone can agree doesn't cost a penny to do. But I want to ask you more about what you think we should do with this information moving forward.
I mean, I think the suggestions that you have are well-founded. I mean, I do believe that the future is around mutual aid, right? About like the gift economy. I mean, the creating alternatives, because I think we have to feed our souls while we're doing this work. Like you can't just do the work and not replenish the well. And then that happens in relationship, in relationship to, there's great satisfaction in giving and receiving. And I think finding opportunities to do those things is really vital. Because even though this is built on a long history, there's not a particular guidebook of how you go up against AI, right? And I think it is from a soulful place. I think maintaining a spiritual practice, whatever that looks like for you, being connected to a greater consciousness, being connected to natural systems, and being willing to question. Because for me, I don't want to lecture at people of exactly what to do, but I think even raising consciousness to say, is regenerative agriculture that? Is that what we meant? What does it mean? Like, what does it mean for the larger ecosystem? Like, is this the best way? And then open the conversation, because I think it doesn't have to be antagonistic. We can just surface some of things. It doesn't make sense to say that we can only feed children if their test scores get better. Is that what we're saying? Because I think we're better than that, right? And much of this is going to be flowing through faith communities and different things. And I like give people the tools to question from a good place, not question from an angry place, but just question like, we should do better. Like our goal is our intention should be to make the world a better place. And I think ultimately too, part of it is how do we both have global solidarity, local autonomy, and provide people other options, right? I mean, how many people are going into cognitive neuroscience and biotech? Clearly that was a large room full of people. Do they have other gifts they could be giving besides that? That would be great. Like, let us do that, because I don't think that we want to be cartoon characters competing for each other to run the robot haptic factory. Like that doesn't sound like, and most of us wouldn't want that, I think, if we knew that, because the stand we take is for future generations. But yeah, but I mean, I don't have the one thing. We do it together. We build those connections together. And sometimes you have to risk putting yourself out to find the other people. Like, I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me to say, thank you, I thought I was the only one. Mm-hmm. Right? And maybe they're the only one where they are and they don't feel comfortable being that voice then. Mm. But with some tools and some skills and some links to be like, this lady, what do you think of what she says? And that's what we do for each other, because it's not just me. I mean, it's Alana, it's my friends who are blogging in these spaces to say, like, let us share the tools and share a different world vision. But I think the world vision, to me, needs to be understood within historic context. And to the challenge is, unfortunately, because of how this, the ability to target genomically for biowarfare, and who knows how all this played out, but those communities who I think voices should be in the lead feel very uncertain about speaking out about what's happening, many of them, which is hard.
Well, Alison, I mean, for me, when I found your work, it was the Fourth Industrial Revolution series, it's one of those great exhales of my life. I was like, wow, here's a soul who has spent just incredible amounts of time and energy to figure out this piece. And I think that what you just said around global solidarity is beautiful, because now we see globalism and, one global governance structure as really the sort of Death Star. And really, I don't want to forget that it is this global community right now. I mean, we've had about 800 people on live for most of this 2-hour presentation. And it just gives people such hope to know that we are creating a field together of shared values, and that it really does have a huge impact. And what I love too, what you just said, is about, it does take sometimes, making a choice that is a little risky, and then finding, after you take that leap of faith, that there are people that are there to catch you and to really value and support you. So I think a lot of us are doing that around the world right now. Yeah. I will say that for me, the correlate to me doing farming and meditation and trauma work on myself, which I think is fundamental for my own psychic health and well-being, is Stand for Health Freedom is one nonprofit organization we created so that anyone in the world can join, and we will have actions set up for people to work together.
Oh, okay.
It's a great technology. We've seen great impact against very draconian regulation as far as forced vaccination. Already here in the States, specifically New Jersey, we helped overturn a bill there that was just devastating. And what I'd love to do in the future is, if it resonates with you, I'll introduce you to my co-founder, Leah Wilson, who's amazing. And maybe, who knows, maybe we could help to get behind one of your advocacies locally in your state, or maybe even nationally, because a lot of people are asking, how can we support the change? What can we do? So I'm just leaving that open. And then
that's great. I think New York for right now seems like they're sort of on the leading edge of trying to face down possible, vaccine mandates for everyone in the state. And I know that given the financial actors that are involved, that would be quite a coup for Cuomo to be able to deliver that. And so I know there are many really good people working on organizing to make sure that doesn't happen.
Definitely. We have John Gilmore, who's an associate with Autism Action Network. And you're right, they're going through a ton of legislation right now that's extremely concerning, including taking away parental rights and decision-making related to vaccination. So thank you for bringing that up. So also, lastly, where can people find you? How can they connect and support beyond, I guess, is it wrenchinthegears.com? And
wrenchinthegears.com.
Yes. And YouTube. Do you have any other way that we can connect, like Telegram or Twitter?
Oh, well, gosh, I just actually made a Telegram channel because somebody asked me for it. So I'll put this on there. I don't know how to tell people where to go. I guess I should put it on my website. Maybe that's what I also am on Twitter. It's at Philly852, so I can tweet that out. And I will say, as far as support, like just do what you can in your community. And I would say if people, and maybe we can include a link because I know you got such nice exposure. When it's over, I have a colleague who taught me a lot, who's doing food sovereignty work on Cheyenne River Reservation. And so I'm fortunate financially not to need any financial support, but if people find this information useful in the spirit of mutual aid, I can put her Venmo out. Her name is Chaz Jewett, and is doing a lot of work there for Indigenous food sovereignty, which I think is really, really vital. So,
cool.
I just, each one, help one, teach one, do what we can.
I will do that. I'll actually make a donation myself. We'll put the link down in the notes, and then we will share your Telegram channel to our Telegram channel. So
okay. I know it's like more technology. I'm like trying to.
No worries. You just be your wonderful self, and I will continue along with all of us to get the word out about this work. There's two reasons. One is I think it's essential in helping to give us really a chance. And then second, for protection, because honestly, the more someone like yourself or myself gets out there telling the truth, in a way, it feels a little bit more dangerous. And it helps to know you have all these supporters who have your back, who's watching out and supporting you. So I want to help to make sure that that happens.
Great. Well, I really appreciate this community, and I appreciate having a chance to talk about this stuff. And, I believe in us. I do. I believe in us. I believe in our greater power, and this is our chance to live our values, right?
Absolutely. Beautiful way to end it. Okay, thank you so much, Alison, and thank you everyone who participated. All right. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.